Picture this. You have 30 minutes with your CEO, and the topic is customer experience. What do you expect to hear from your CEO? What do they want to know? And what do you need to say to get the CEO's attention? These are some of the things that we're going to talk about today as we share the results of a year-long study that we have done on the CEO view of customer experience. Now, for some of you, this topic may actually seem familiar. If you attended our CX Summit back in May, or if you attended our webcast in July, you know we touched on this subject. But at the time, that was a preliminary report, and today we're going to present a more comprehensive view that represents both the CEO and the CX professional. I'm joined by the two people most involved in this study, and that is our Chairman and CEO, Steve Walker, and Leslie Pagel, our own Customer Experience Vice President and the lead researcher on this report. I'm Pat Gibbons, and I'll serve as your moderator today. At the end of today's presentation, we'll provide resources. As usual, you'll have an opportunity to download the slides or access a recorded version that you can share. You'll also be able to download a recorded version of this report, and we'll give you all that information at the end of the study. For those of you that are regulars, you know that we keep these kind of short and sweet. They're 30 minutes, and we do encourage you to participate. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag WalkerCast, and we encourage you to use the chat feature and jot any questions or comments that you have. And since I mentioned that, I actually want to encourage you to do that now by typing in one word, and here's the question. I'm curious to know your level of interaction with your CEO when it comes to the topic of customer experience. So here are some suggested words to put in. One could be, I never really have access to the CEO to have this kind of conversation. Or second, maybe it's rarely you have an opportunity to have this kind of interaction. For some of you, it may be routinely that you have either quarterly meeting or every 6 months you have the opportunity to share with the CEO. Or maybe for some of you, it's frequently, and maybe they're even coming to you with requests for information and data. So use those words, never, rarely, routinely, or frequently, or any word that you have to describe, but type in one word, and maybe we'll reference these throughout the webcast. So let's talk about the study. We conducted this because we feel there are often gaps between the view of the CEO and the customer experience professional, and it makes sense. They have very different perspectives. And so we sought to gather these perspectives, compare them, and try to provide some recommendations on a productive relationship that can only help the business succeed. So we sought input from CEOs, certainly. We began by providing or executing qualitative interviews with some selected CEOs, but then we teamed up with Chief Executive Magazine, where we got hundreds of pieces of feedback from CEOs and concluded with an intriguing roundtable discussion, which you see pictured here, where CEOs spent a couple hours discussing the topic of customer experience and what it means to their business. Then we turned to the customer experience professional. We worked with Customer Think, which is an online community, and the Customer Experience Professionals Association, or the CXPA. And from their memberships, we gathered lots of input from CX professionals that we could compare and contrast with those from the CEO group. So let's begin with the CEO. Leslie, we learned a lot about CEOs and what's on their mind, not just CX, but in general. Why don't you share some of that with us?
Wonderful. Well, as you mentioned, we really wanted to understand the issues that are on the minds of CEOs today and wanted to get a broad perspective, not just focus solely on the customer experience. So we asked Marshall Cooper, who's the the CEO of Chief Executive Group, to speak at our CX Summit and share with us what's on the mind of the CEOs. And first, he talked about the CEO's responsibilities and ultimately said the CEO is responsible for driving revenue, reducing or eliminating unnecessary costs, improving the value of the organization, creating a company that attracts and retains employees, and creating a competitive advantage. In his presentation, Marshall also talked about the most common complaint he hears from CEOs, and that is that too few people within the organization think strategically. CEOs want people who are looking and thinking ahead on 4 key topics for which they spend their time thinking about. The first topic that CEOs spend their time thinking about is globalization. Failure in emerging markets, along with other global challenges such as currency volatility, global conflict, and acts of terror, create an environment that's uncertain, which impacts business growth. CEOs also spend their time thinking about regulation. This is largely driven by increasing complexity, changing rules, and political uncertainty. In addition to globalization and regulation, CEOs also focus on talent. CEOs know that attracting top talent is critical to business success. And the last topic that Marshall talked about is the pace of change. CEOs know that those who can adapt to rapid changes in technology and business model innovation are the ones that will create a competitive advantage. So what does this perspective have to do with the customer experience? Well, with the ability to provide strategic customer insights, customer experience professionals are in an excellent position to attract and retain the CEO's attention.
Okay, so it's interesting to think about these issues, how they connect to CX. But Steve, specifically, what are CEOs saying when it comes to customer experience? How are they viewing that?
Our study discovered quite a bit of views of the CEO specifically about CX, but I think we can summarize it in 4 main buckets today. First, and probably the best news for us as a profession in CX professionals, is that it is the leading way that CEOs perceive that they are going to compete in the marketplace. In our study, 40% of our CEOs we interviewed stated that customer experience was the way that they were going to create competitive advantage in their markets. The next 2 items were listed as talent and product. And for many of you who are practitioners, you probably know that oftentimes those are the 2 big components that make up the customer experience, our people and our products. I think just as interesting is the fact that, pricing and distribution strategies are not as viewed as competitive differentiators. I have a feeling if we went back 10 or 15 years that they would have been much more likely to be the differentiators. So I think the first really positive news for us is that customer experience is the way that most CEOs believe they are going to differentiate today. The second finding was that we were able to split our sample by those companies that were growing faster, who had grown faster in the past, and who were forecasting higher growth. And interestingly, what we discovered is that those companies that are both proving that they've grown faster in the past and are projecting faster growth also tend to agree that they're more effective at executing against their CX objectives. So again, here's another opportunity for us to speak the CEO's language, is that those organizations that believe that they're more effective at executing their CX do demonstrate better business performance, better outcomes in terms of growth. For those of you who are familiar with us, we've chronicled this through our Walker Index, where we actually do calculate the value of the stock price of our clients as a proxy for customer-focused organizations. And over a long period of time, this goes back to 1994, but over the last 22 years, clients in our index have outperformed the broader market indices by a factor of 6, 7, 8 to 1, depending exactly on what time we look at it. But again, it's another confirmation of the ROI that customer-focused companies enjoy. The third big finding, I think, from CEOs is what customer-focused companies, or companies that are good at executing against the customer experience, what they get to spend their time on. from our study, those that are most effective at the CX tend to be focused more on talent or employee morale, as well as innovation, not just in their products, but in their processes, their people, their training, et cetera. Those organizations that report not as being as effective tend to be more focused on things like cost cutting. And our conclusion on this is that we have decided to call this the CX dividend. A dividend, as we know in business world, is a return that we get on our investment. And what we choose to do with that dividend is we can take it to the bank, or we can spend it, or we can reinvest it back in the business. And one of our findings is that the CX-focused companies, they enjoy this dividend, and they tend to plow that dividend back in terms of creating a better culture around CX, as well as being more innovative in their products, services, people, and delivery systems. The fourth finding that we found is that almost unanimously, the CEOs in our study, when asked who owns the responsibility for the customer experience, say that the CEO does. However, that is quickly followed along by the fact that they want customer experience to be pervasive throughout the organization. So they don't want silos. They are not looking for a single solution to who's in charge of the customer experience. The customer experience, again, if you're going to differentiate on that, has to find its way into every aspect of the business. And so CEOs say that they own it, but they also are looking for other executives and other functions within the business to be involved in that. I think Leslie's early comment about people who think strategically, this is a key concept there as it relates to making the CX relevant and important for your CEO.
Okay, so some interesting insights from the CEOs. Let's talk about them for a second. I think through the study, you guys came up with kind of a hit list of the traits of customer-focused CEOs, right?
Correct.
Let's hear them.
All right. I believe we have 7. I'll go first. The first one is that customer-focused CEOs use their insights strategically. They're not as interested in the scores or in the findings as much as they are interested in how it can drive some positive change that relates to the business and how it can impact the company in relevant ways, be that structure of the marketplace, be that how they allocate resources, how they go to market, and what they reward and incentivize.
One of the recurring themes at the CEO Roundtable that we sponsored earlier this summer is around consistency. CEOs realize that positive, sustainable results don't happen overnight. They value consistency in both messaging and behavior and are willing to set aside short-term financial gain for the long-term benefit to customers. They demonstrate a patience and resist the urge to change midstream.
Another finding we have is that the customer-focused, effective CEOs tend to believe a broader customer story. We know that most CEOs really relish the opportunity to interact with key customers. This is often anecdotal, and so I think the most effective CEOs that we saw are really very interested in building a broader system of understanding and insights from the customer. It's something they can trade the anecdotal evidence that they get in the marketplace off of, as well as go back and sort of refer that to other things and other ways that they look at the business.
And they know that the customer experience spans organizational silos, so they're focused on creating a culture in which employees are connected and responsive to each other across the organization.
This comes right back to this concept of the CX dividend that we talked about earlier. But these customer-focused CEOs spend an awful lot of time creating a culture around being customer-focused, especially with their frontline employees or employees that support employees that are customer-facing. So this is where the CX dividend comes in, is that those organizations that are more effective, they have more resources to actually reinvest back into creating a culture that is very customer-focused.
And customer-focused CEOs also seek customer insights and advice. They are concerned with the unknown and are looking for intelligence that's forward-looking and relevant to the business goals. Earlier, Pat had asked for your input on how regularly you meet with your CEOs. And the CEOs that we have found to be most successful are likely to be meeting with the customer experience professionals regularly and frequently. Some of you do have this luxury today, but others don't. You don't have that connection with the CEO on a regular basis.
And lastly, the most effective CEOs are using the customer information to make the call on resources, whether that's funding, whether it's killing an initiative that maybe is not customer-focused, as well as setting the priorities. We see frequently that companies try to bite off too many things and too many initiatives, and the most effective CEOs are aligning that customer perspective back into the really key critical items that they're going to pursue and that they're going to fund and resource.
So let's turn to the CX professional, because we got a lot of feedback from them as well. What are they saying about their CEOs, Leslie?
Well, for the most part, CX professionals believe that their CEO is customer-focused. CEOs want to understand the customer perspective and are often seen and heard supporting CX. But is this support enough to create a competitive advantage? Well, here's what we found. We asked customer experience professionals if the strategy that they're developing and executing is having an impact on the business. And the good news is that virtually everyone said yes, it has some level of impact. We also asked CX professionals how effective their company is at leveraging the customer experience to create an advantage in the market. And only 22% said they're extremely or very effective at leveraging CX to create an advantage. The majority said they're somewhat effective. Since we're focused on creating an advantage, it was important for us to understand the effectiveness of the competition as well. So we asked and found out that the primary competitor is about the same in terms of their effectiveness at leveraging CX to create an advantage. With this as the backdrop, the question becomes, is it really an advantage if the company and its competitors are equally effective? No, it's not. It's a lost advantage. What we found is that the degree of impact that the CX strategy has on the organization matters. When companies are leveraging the customer experience to create substantial business impact, they are more effective at leveraging the advantage. 2/3 of the companies are getting differentiation from the experiences they deliver to the customers. And their competitors, only 22% are considered effective. These companies have achieved the advantage. So what does this all mean? Essentially, it means that good just isn't good enough. Most companies are equally good at leveraging CX, so nobody really benefits. But those that are really creating impact for the business have a big advantage versus the competition, and that's what CEOs are looking for. In addition to understanding the opportunities to differentiate, we also wanted to see if CX professionals are focused on the things that CEOs really want. So we asked CX professionals, what are the top 3 activities that you're focused on? And they mentioned identification of what to improve and how to do it, creating the right culture, CX competencies across the organization. Then we asked them, what do your CEOs expect? And they said competitive advantage and financial impact on the business. So there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of what the CX professional is focused on versus what the CEO is expecting out of the initiative.
So Steve, maybe you could kind of tie some of this together. What is it that CX pros should do? I mean, really to be effective, they need to be on the agenda, right? What are some of the things they can do to get on the agenda?
Yeah, I think generally we want to be starting to talk more and more about the things that CEOs are interested in, which Leslie just covered, which is growth, profitability, increasing the value of the organization. And that may be a little bit of a stretch. So here's a couple of tips or sort of some ideas that you might want to play out. This concept of the CX dividend, I think, is really powerful. And it does start to speak about the return on investment from a CX program. So I think that talking about the organizations that are the most effective are the ones that are able to invest their dividends into innovation and talent, because we know talent is at the top of the list for CEOs' interest. Another idea to consider is this concept of going from break-fix to breakthrough. Oftentimes in our CX programs, we're really focused on, intervening or fixing things that are broken. But there's just as much insight that could provide real growth opportunities, like customers that are not being fully penetrated in terms of your products and services, or companies that have a really great relationship with you, but you don't really have a huge share of business with them. So starting to think more about not just how do we fix what's wrong with the business, but how can we bring our solutions to actually improve and increase the business performance. Another item is this concept of talent. Leslie mentioned it right out of the box. This is exactly on the top of the minds of most of our CEOs. And part of what we're trying to develop our talent for is to make sure that they provide a great customer experience to customers. So there's a big opportunity here to interact, not take over the HR function, but to provide a great resource to the HR function in terms of training and development of customer-focused employees and associates. This is a model that we use at Walker to really kind of hook into the business objectives, and I think that is probably the big major finding from the study, is that we have to relate what we're seeing from the customer perspective back to what the business is trying to accomplish, and defined very much in the CEO's terms. That is, growth in revenue, growth in profitability, improving our valuation of the stock price, attracting better talent, having a more competitive differentiation in the marketplace. So this little 6-step process helps you put CX in the perspective that may help you communicate with the C-level executives. But it really does. It starts with what the business is trying to accomplish, how they measure that success, and then how those customer insights can turn into effective actions, and then track the results and get the quick wins, and then continue the loop through to communicating that success. I think that this framework is really, really helpful for CX professionals to put what they're passionate about and put what that focus is back to the CEO's language and what the CEO is interested in.
Okay, we've got a few minutes for some question and answer, so let me fire a few questions away at you. First, I'm going to give you just a little bit of results. Thanks to those of you that typed in a word or two about your relationship with your CEO. I'll say the vast majority of you are saying you really don't have much opportunity to relate with the CEO on any sort of regular basis. There's some variation, but most just don't have much of that opportunity. So hopefully this report can be helpful, because maybe it'll allow you to break through. The first question I had was getting back to this topic of innovation. Sometimes when I think of innovation, I think of products. I think, coming up with the next big product or the next big feature or whatever. That's not really what we're talking about here, is it?
No, actually, innovation in the CEO perspective extends beyond the product. It's focusing on the services, the people, the ways that they interact with the organization. And we are seeing that CX professionals are starting to get more involved in kind of innovating the experience. And we believe that the CX professionals really need to take the leadership role in CX innovation. So not just focusing on those break-fix areas of the experience that could be kind of quick wins, but more on looking at the experience, identifying where there is an opportunity to create a differentiated experience, and creating the innovation and the breakthrough around that particular customer interaction.
So there's got to be some advice in here for CEOs, right? So what are the things that they can do to support the customer experience strategies? Thoughts on that?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to one of the initial findings is that most CEOs today believe that that's how they're going to competitively differentiate themselves in the marketplace. So I think that it starts at the top, making a statement that the customer experience is something that's very important in the organization, and then empowering the functions to make sure that you are aligning that with whatever the business is trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would just add that one of the messages for the CEOs is really about leveraging their role to help break down some of the barriers that exist to CX professionals. And three common barriers that we hear are kind of having the authority to drive action and change in the organization, getting access to the right customer intelligence that they need to provide recommendations to the business to create the outcomes that CEOs are looking for, as well as holding people accountable for actions within the organization, having a system for acting on customer intelligence and driving improvements based on that information.
Yeah. Good. Real quick, last question. Is there a best structure, or there's talk about chief customer officers and so forth? Is that something that we would say is the right type of structure?
Well, I think there's still a lot of debate on that.
Yeah.
I think that the CEO, at least in our study, has said that they are the chief customer officer. However, if they would choose to put that into the function of another executive, I think the key finding from the results is that it's got to be cross-functional. It cannot be a silo, or it's doomed to failure. That the chief customer officer really has to be sort of a proxy for the CEO and make sure that these initiatives are going across the organization broadly.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. I mean, I know this has been a year long in the works, and that's a very quick summary. The report has lots more detail in it. On the screen is where you can get the resources, where you can not only download the slides and have access to a recorded version of this webcast that you can share, but it will also have a link there that will take you to a site where you can download the report. Now, you'll notice a purchase price on that, and if you use this discount code, COMPCEO, you will be able to get a complimentary report. So I would encourage everybody to check out the report. It really is a nice piece of research that we think is a first ever in this industry. And I'll come back and share those URLs one more time if you didn't get them down. Real quickly, I'll mention our next webcast is next year. It's January 19th, and we're going to kind of play on this topic we mentioned today of innovation, of how CX professionals can take the lead on CX innovation. Feel free, if you have questions, contact any of us, and we'll make sure to get back to you. And then I'll remind you once again, this is a production of Walker. We are a customer experience consulting firm. We have consulting services, technology, analytics services, and we're set up to basically try to meet everybody exactly where they're at in improving their customer experience programs. So once again, I'm going to go back to the URL, and we will sign off today. I wish everybody happy holidays, and we hope that you can attend our next webcast. Have a good day.